The cashier accidentally printed a lottery ticket using my last money. A week later, I stumbled upon the lottery broadcast, and every number matched. I had won $124 million. My roommate immediately said, "We're friends. I deserve a piece too." When I refused, he just walked away. But that night, while I was asleep, he tried to steal my ticket and attacked me. So this happened back when I was a broke college sophomore at Ohio State, living in the dorms with my roommate Jake, surviving off ramen and whatever $50 my mom could spare each month. That Tuesday started like any other. Bombed my chemistry quiz, spilled coffee on my only clean shirt, and discovered I had exactly $12 in my checking account until Friday. Jake was dealing with his own crisis. His girlfriend Sarah had been ignoring his texts all day because he'd forgotten their 3-month anniversary. He was pacing around our tiny room like a caged animal, asking me every 5 minutes what he should do. I kept telling him to just buy her flowers, but apparently that was too simple for his overthinking brain. By evening, we were both starving. Our meal plan had run out the week before, and we'd been stretching our last few dollars as far as possible. Jake suggested hitting up his ex-roommate Marcus for leftover pizza, but I wasn't desperate enough to deal with that guy's weird conspiracy theories about the cafeteria food. Instead, I decided to make a run to Frank's corner store near campus. This little place had saved my life more times than I could count. Open late, decent prices, and Frank never judged you for buying dinner that came in a can. The plan was simple: grab some bread, milk, and cheap coffee to get me through the next few days. I walked the 3 blocks in the cold Ohio night, counting the crumpled bills in my pocket. Exactly $10.53. Had to make it stretch until my bookstore paycheck hit on Friday. At least rent wasn't due for another week. Frank's store was almost empty when I got there. Just me and some guy buying energy drinks who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Frank was behind the counter looking exhausted himself, probably pulling another double shift. The man had been working at that store longer than I'd been alive. I grabbed my usual survival kit. Cheapest white bread they had, milk that would probably turn sour tomorrow, and a container of coffee that tasted like dirt but had enough caffeine to keep me functional. Walked up to the counter and set everything down. Frank started scanning items without looking up. Bread, milk, coffee. The register showed $8.47. I pulled out my $10 bill and waited for my change. That's when Frank reached behind the counter and grabbed a lottery ticket, scanning it without a word. The total jumped to $9.47. I stared at the register display, confused. Frank was already reaching for my money when I cleared my throat and pointed at the screen. He looked at the receipt, then at me, then back at the receipt. His shoulders sagged like someone had let the air out of him. He told me the system wouldn't let him void lottery tickets. Something about state regulations and manager approval. Said he'd already messed up the register twice that week and couldn't afford another strike. The guy looked genuinely panicked about it. Part of me wanted to argue, but Frank had always been decent to us college kids. Plus, that dollar wasn't going to make or break me, and he looked like he was having a worse day than I was. So I took the ticket. Frank apologized 3 times while counting out my change, and I walked out into the cold night feeling slightly irritated but trying to convince myself I'd done a good deed. The numbers on the ticket meant nothing to me. 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, and Powerball 18. Back in the dorm, Jake was still spiraling about Sarah. He'd moved on from flowers to planning some elaborate romantic gesture involving a playlist and fairy lights. I tossed a lottery ticket on my desk next to a pile of overdue assignments and tried to talk him out of doing something that would definitely backfire. The next few days blurred together in typical college chaos. Jake's romantic gesture went exactly as badly as I predicted. Turns out Sarah was ignoring him because she was stressed about her psychology midterm, not because of their anniversary. My chemistry professor announced a surprise quiz that I was definitely going to fail. The lottery ticket disappeared under a growing pile of textbooks and empty coffee cups. Thursday came and went. I worked my shift at the bookstore, made $60 selling overpriced textbooks to freshmen who didn't know better yet. Used most of it to pay back money I owed to various friends or food, leaving me with about $20 to get through the weekend. Friday evening, Jake and Sarah were finally talking again. I was trying to write an English paper about the Great Gatsby while listening to Jake's side of their 3-hour phone conversation. The lottery ticket was still buried somewhere on my desk, completely forgotten under textbooks and coffee cups. Saturday, I worked my bookstore shift and spent the evening in my room studying. The ticket remained invisible, just another piece of paper in the general chaos of college life. Sunday came and went quietly. Caught up on homework, worked on that English paper, helped Jake study for his statistics exam. The lottery ticket sat there forgotten, buried under assignments and empty coffee cups. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I had no idea that sitting on my desk was a piece of paper worth more money than I could imagine. In a few days, everything would change completely. Wednesday evening rolled around, and I was sitting in my dorm room with Jake, both of us procrastinating on our assignments. He was scrolling through his phone while I tried to make sense of my chemistry notes, which looked like hieroglyphics at this point. Jake suddenly perked up and said the Ohio Lottery was doing their drawing tonight. He pulled up the live stream on his laptop just for background noise while we worked. Neither of us really cared. We were just two broke college students trying to survive another week. The drawing started, and some overly enthusiastic host began pulling numbered balls from a machine. Jake was barely paying attention, still texting Sarah about their weekend plans. I was highlighting random passages in my textbook, hoping something would stick in my brain for tomorrow's quiz. Then I remembered that stupid lottery ticket Frank had accidentally added to my purchase. It was buried somewhere on my desk, under all the clutter. For some reason, I found myself curious about what numbers I had. I started digging through the mess on my desk, textbooks, empty coffee cups, assignment sheets, more textbooks. Jake asked what I was looking for, and I told him about the lottery ticket from the corner store incident. He laughed and said maybe I'd get lucky and win $5. Finally found a crumpled ticket stuck between pages of my economics textbook. The numbers were still readable: 7, 14, 23, 35, 42, and Powerball 18. Jake glanced over and said those looked as random as any other numbers. The host on the live stream was announcing the winning numbers. First ball, 7. I looked at my ticket. Yep, had a 7. Second ball, 14. Also on my ticket. Third ball, 23. I was starting to pay attention now. Fourth ball, 35. Fifth ball, 42. Jake noticed I'd gone completely silent and asked if I was okay. I couldn't speak. I was staring at my ticket, then at the screen, then back at my ticket. The Powerball, 18. My hand started shaking. This couldn't be happening. I must have misread something. Jake saw my expression and grabbed the ticket from my hands to check for himself. His eyes went wide as he compared the numbers on screen to what was printed on that crumpled piece of paper. He looked at me, then at the screen showing the jackpot amount, $124 million. Then back at me. Then he started laughing. Not because it was funny, but because his brain couldn't process what was happening either. I felt like the room was spinning. 20 minutes ago, I was worried about affording lunch tomorrow. Now I was apparently worth more money than I could even comprehend. Jake kept looking between the ticket and the laptop screen, like he expected the numbers to change. He started pacing around our tiny room, running his hands through his hair and muttering about how this was impossible. Meanwhile, I just sat there frozen, holding a piece of paper that had just changed my entire life. Jake finally stopped pacing and looked at me seriously. He said I needed to be very careful about who I told. Money like this could make people do crazy things, even people I trusted. He suggested I hide the ticket somewhere safe until I could figure out what to do next. I tucked it into my calculus textbook, figured that was the last place anyone would look. But as I was closing the book, I noticed Jake watching my every move. There was something in his expression I'd never seen before. We both tried to go back to studying, but neither of us could concentrate. Jake kept glancing at my textbook stack, and I kept catching him looking. The atmosphere in our room had shifted completely. An hour ago, we were just roommates complaining about homework. Now there was this weird tension between us. Around midnight, Jake said he was going to get some air and maybe call Sarah. After he left, I moved the ticket to a different hiding spot inside my psychology textbook this time. Something told me I shouldn't let anyone know exactly where it was, even my roommate. When Jake came back, he seemed different, more distant. He asked if I'd thought about what I was going to do with the money. I told him I hadn't really processed it yet. He nodded, but I could tell his mind was working on something. He suggested we grab breakfast together in the morning and talk through my options. Said he wanted to help me figure out the best way to handle this situation. It sounded reasonable, but something in his tone made me uncomfortable. I lay awake most of that night staring at the ceiling. My psychology textbook was right next to my pillow, and I kept reaching over to make sure the ticket was still there. Every little sound in the hallway made me paranoid that someone was coming for it. Jake was tossing and turning too, clearly not sleeping either. At one point, I thought I heard him get up and move around the room, but when I opened my eyes, he was back in his bed. Maybe I was just being paranoid. By morning, I realized Jake was right about one thing. This money was going to change everything. But as I watched him get ready for class, acting like nothing had happened, I started to wonder if the biggest changes might not be the ones I expected. By Thursday morning, somehow the entire dorm knew about my lottery ticket. I still don't know how word spread so fast. Maybe Jake told Sarah. Maybe someone overheard our conversation. Or maybe news like this just has a way of traveling in college. Either way, my secret was out. Walking to breakfast felt like being in a fishbowl. People were staring, whispering, pointing. Some guys I barely knew were suddenly my best friends, slapping me on the back and wanting to hang out. Others looked at me like I'd personally stolen money from their pockets. The reactions were all over the place. My friend Marcus from down the hall was genuinely happy for me, said I deserved something good after all the financial stress I'd been dealing with. But his roommate Dave made some comment about how unfair it was that someone who didn't even want to buy a lottery ticket got lucky. Even the cafeteria workers were treating me differently. The lady who usually ignored me when I ordered asked if I was a lottery guy, then started being super friendly and giving me extra food. It was weird having strangers suddenly interested in my life. Jake was acting strange all morning. He kept hovering around me, inserting himself into every conversation, making sure everyone knew he was my roommate. When people asked about the ticket, he'd jump in and tell the story like he'd been part of winning it somehow. During our economics class, he leaned over and whispered that we should skip lunch and go grab pizza off campus where we could talk privately. Said he had some ideas about how I should handle the situation. The way he said, we made me uncomfortable. We ended up at this little pizza place near campus where Jake proceeded to lay out his master plan for my lottery winnings. He'd clearly been thinking about this all night. He suggested we should claim the ticket together, split it 50-50, since he'd been there when I discovered the win. I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. I reminded him that it was my ticket, bought with my money, even if it was an accident. Jake got defensive, saying we were supposed to be friends, that friends share good fortune with each other. He kept pushing the idea, getting more desperate as I kept saying no. Jake argued that he deserved something because he'd supported me through all my financial problems, helped me study, been a good roommate. He made it sound like I owed him millions of dollars for a basic friendship. The conversation got heated. Other customers were starting to look over at our table. Jake's voice was getting louder as he explained why it was only fair that he get half. I told him firmly that the ticket was mine and mine alone. That's when Jake's whole demeanor changed. The fake friendliness disappeared, and something ugly took its place. He looked at me with pure resentment and said I was being selfish, that we were both broke college students, and I was acting like I was better than him now. He leaned back in his chair and smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. Jake said he guessed he'd found out what kind of person I really was when money got involved. The implication was clear. He thought I was being greedy and heartless. I tried to explain that this wasn't about friendship or money changing me. If he'd won a lottery ticket, I wouldn't expect him to split with me just because we lived in the same room. But Jake wasn't listening anymore. He was too caught up in his own sense of injustice. The ride back to campus was silent and tense. Jake stared out the window the whole time, occasionally shaking his head like he was having an internal argument. I could practically feel the anger radiating off him. Back in our dorm room, things got even weirder. Jake started making pointed comments about loyalty and friendship. He'd bring up times he'd helped me out, lending me $5 for food, sharing his textbooks, covering for me when I slept through alarms. Every kindness was now being presented as evidence that I owed him. He suggested maybe I could at least pay for his student loans as a gesture of appreciation. When I said I hadn't even claimed the ticket yet and needed to think about everything, Jake's expression darkened. He muttered something about people forgetting where they came from. That evening, Jake went out with some friends and came back around midnight, clearly having had a few drinks. He sat on his bed and started talking about how unfair life was. How some people got all the breaks, while others worked twice as hard for nothing. He wasn't directly talking about the lottery, but the subtext was obvious. Jake kept glancing at my desk where he thought the ticket was hidden. I'd actually moved it earlier to my backpack, but I let him think it was still in the textbook. Before going to bed, Jake made one more attempt to change my mind. He sat on the edge of his bed and said we'd been through so much together as roommates. That splitting the money would be the right thing to do, the fair thing to do. When I didn't respond, Jake's friendly mask slipped completely. He said he hoped I'd remember this conversation when I was lonely in my mansion. That money couldn't buy real friendship, and I was about to find out the hard way. I pretended to be asleep, but I was actually watching Jake through barely open eyes. He kept getting up and moving around the room, stopping near my desk, looking at my textbook stack. Around 3 a.m., he finally settled down, but I could tell he wasn't sleeping either. Something had fundamentally changed between us. The roommate I'd lived with for over a year was becoming someone I didn't recognize, and I was starting to realize that having this lottery ticket might be more dangerous than I thought. Lying there in the dark, I made a decision. Tomorrow I'd find a safer place to keep the ticket, because something in Jake's eyes told me this conversation was far from over. I just had no idea how far he was willing to go to get what he thought he deserved. Friday passed in uncomfortable silence between Jake and me. He barely spoke during meals, just gave me these resentful looks when he thought I wasn't watching. I'd moved the lottery ticket to my backpack and kept it with me everywhere. Even took it to the bathroom, which felt ridiculous but necessary. That evening, Jake announced he was going to a party at some fraternity house. Said he needed to blow off steam and wouldn't be back until late. I was actually relieved. The tension in our room had become unbearable over the past 2 days. I spent the evening working on assignments and tried to research what to do about claiming lottery prizes. The Ohio lottery website was full of legal jargon and warnings about taxes and publicity. Apparently, winners had come forward within 180 days, and there was no way to stay anonymous in Ohio. Around 11 p.m., I moved the ticket from my backpack to an envelope, which I tucked inside my pillowcase. Figured that was the safest place since I'd be sleeping on it. Jake still wasn't back, and I was hoping he'd stay out all night to give us both some space. I fell asleep around midnight, exhausted from all the stress and paranoia the past few days. But sometime in the early morning hours, I woke up to a soft, rustling sound. At first, I thought it might be mice. Our dorm had a serious rodent problem that the administration refused to deal with. Then I heard a drawer being opened very carefully. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw a figure crouched next to my desk, going through my things methodically. It was Jake, moving slowly and quietly, clearly trying not to wake me up. I watched in shock as he searched in my textbooks, opened every drawer, even checked inside my coffee cups. He was looking for the lottery ticket, and he was being systematic about it. This wasn't some drunken impulse. He'd planned this. When Jake couldn't find anything at my desk, he moved to my dresser, started going through my clothes, checking pockets, feeling around the drawers. I was frozen in my bed, partly from disbelief and partly from fear about what he might do if he found the ticket. Jake's search became more frantic as he kept coming up empty. He checked my backpack, went through my closet, even looked inside my shoes. Finally, he turned toward my bed, and I realized he was going to check my pillowcase. That's when I knew I had to act. As Jake reached toward my pillow, I grabbed his wrist and asked what he thought he was doing. He jumped back like he'd been electrocuted, caught red-handed in the middle of his robbery attempt. For a second, Jake looked genuinely ashamed. Then his expression hardened, and he demanded to know where I'd hidden the ticket. Said he'd been looking everywhere, and knew I must have it stashed somewhere in the room. The way he was talking, like he had a right to search my stuff, was unbelievable. I told him he was out of his mind, and needed to get away from my bed immediately. Jake stepped back, but didn't leave. Instead, he started explaining why he deserved half the money. Same arguments as before, but now with this desperate edge that made him seem unstable. Jake said he knew exactly where the ticket was. He could see the envelope sticking out from under my pillow. He lunged forward and tried to grab it before I could react. We ended up struggling over the envelope, both of us pulling on it while trying to maintain control. The envelope started tearing from the tension. I could see the lottery ticket inside getting crumpled as we fought over it. Jake was stronger than me, but I had leverage since I was on the bed. We rolled off onto the floor, still wrestling for the envelope. Our struggle was getting loud. Furniture getting knocked over, both of us grunting and cursing as we fought. Jake managed to get the torn envelope away from me for a second, but when he opened it, the lottery ticket fell out and started sliding toward the radiator. We both dove for it at the same time, crashing into each other. The ticket was inches away from falling behind the radiator, where we might never get out. I managed to grab it just as Jake's hand closed over mine, trying to pry my fingers open. That's when our dorm room door burst open. Marcus and two other guys from our floor rushed in, having heard the commotion from down the hall. They saw us on the floor fighting over what looked like a piece of paper and demanded to know what was going on. Jake immediately let go and tried to play it off like we'd been joking around. Said we were just wrestling and things got out of hand. But Marcus could see the torn envelope, the overturned furniture, and the genuine fear in my eyes. He wasn't buying Jake's explanation. I stood up, clutching the lottery ticket, and told Marcus exactly what had happened. Jake tried to interrupt, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that we were just having a disagreement between roommates. But the evidence was pretty clear. He'd been searching my stuff in the middle of the night. Marcus looked at Jake with disgust and told him that what he'd done was theft, plain and simple. The other guys agreed, saying they'd heard Jake talking at the party about how unfair it was that I wouldn't share the lottery money. Apparently, he'd been drinking and complaining about me all night. Jake realized he was outnumbered and his story wasn't working. He got defensive and started yelling about how we were all against him, how nobody understood that friends were supposed to help each other. His desperation was obvious and frankly kind of scary. Marcus told Jake he needed to pack his stuff and find somewhere else to sleep that night. Said if I wanted to press charges for attempted theft, he'd back me up as a witness. Jake looked at me with pure hatred, like this was somehow my fault for not just giving him what he wanted. 20 minutes later, campus security arrived because someone had called about a disturbance. Jake tried to convince them it was just a roommate disagreement. But when they saw the damaged envelope and heard multiple witnesses describe what happened, they took it seriously. They ended up filing an incident report and told Jake he couldn't return to our room without permission from student housing. As they escorted him out with his overnight bag, Jake looked back at me one last time and said this wasn't over. After everyone left, I sat alone in my destroyed room, holding the lottery ticket that had nearly cost me my safety. The paper was wrinkled and had a small tear, but it was still valid, worth $124 million, and apparently worth destroying a friendship over. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every sound in the hallway made me think Jake was coming back to finish what he'd started. Saturday morning came with a knock on my door from campus security and a student housing administrator. They needed my full statement about what had happened with Jake, and they wanted to know if I intended to press formal charges for attempted theft. I spent 2 hours going through every detail the past few days. Jake's increasing demands for money, his late-night search of my belongings, the physical struggle over the lottery ticket. The security officer took photos of the torn envelope and the damage to our room as evidence. By noon, the housing administrator informed me that Jake was being moved to a different dorm immediately. Said they took theft between roommates very seriously, especially when it involved valuable items. Jake would have to go through a disciplinary hearing and could face suspension if I decided to pursue criminal charges. I asked what Jake had said about the incident. Apparently, He tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that he was just trying to help me find a safer place to store the ticket. But the physical evidence and witness statements made his story fall apart pretty quickly. That afternoon, I made the decision that would change everything. I took the lottery ticket to the Ohio Lottery Commission office in Columbus, about 30 minutes from campus. Had to take 2 buses to get there, clutching my backpack the entire time, like someone might try to rob me. The office was surprisingly normal, just looked like a regular government building with fluorescent lights and beige walls. I walked up to the counter, handed over my ticket, and told the clerk I thought I might have won something. The clerk scanned my ticket into her computer system, and I watched her expression change completely. She looked at the screen, then at my ticket, then back at the screen, called over her supervisor, who did the same double-take routine. Within 5 minutes, I was sitting in a private office with 3 lottery officials, all congratulating me and explaining what would happen next. The ticket was legitimate. I had indeed won the full jackpot of $124 million. They gave me 2 options: take a lump sum payment of about $78 million after taxes, or receive the full amount in annual payments over 30 years. I chose the lump sum. Figured it was better to have control over the money, rather than trusting the lottery system for 3 decades. The paperwork took forever. Tax forms, legal documents, publicity waivers. They explained that as an Ohio winner, my name and photo would be public record. There was no way to stay anonymous, which meant my life was about to become very different. By evening, I was sitting in my dorm room holding a check for $78 million. The number was so large it didn't seem real. I kept staring at it, waiting for someone to tell me it was all a mistake. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Apparently, news of the lottery claim had already leaked, and reporters were trying to get interviews. I turned off my phone and just sat there in silence. Around 8 p.m., there was another knock on my door. I thought it might be more housing officials or maybe reporters who'd track me down. Instead, it was Jake, looking exhausted and defeated. He asked if he could come in to talk. Against my better judgment, I let him in. Jake looked around our room. His bed was already stripped, his desk cleared out. The housing department had been efficient about removing his stuff. Jake sat on his former bed and apologized for what had happened. Said the stress of seeing me when all that money had made him temporarily lose his mind. He claimed he never actually intended to steal the ticket, just wanted to convince me one more time to share it. I told him that breaking into someone's belongings at 3 a.m. wasn't exactly a conversation starter. Jake nodded and admitted he'd handled everything wrong. But then he said something that showed he still didn't really get it. He said he hoped I'd remember our friendship when I was living in my mansion. That money like this would isolate me from normal people. And eventually I'd realize that the relationships I'd had before winning were the only genuine ones I'd ever have. Jake stood up to leave, then turned back and said he hoped the money would make me happy. But he doubted it would, that I'd spend the rest of my life wondering if people liked me or just wanted something from me. His parting shot was that I'd end up lonely and paranoid. After he left, I sat there holding that check and thinking about his words. In just 1 week, I'd gone from worrying about affording lunch to being wealthier than most people could imagine. But I'd also lost my roommate, my privacy, and any sense of safety I'd had. My phone was still buzzing with calls from reporters, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years, and people claiming to be financial advisors. Jake had been right about one thing. I was already starting to question everyone's motives. That night, I moved to a hotel off campus for safety. Couldn't stay in the dorms with reporters calling and people knowing exactly where to find me. I paid for a suite with cash, signed in under a fake name, and tried to figure out what to do next. Lying in that hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that winning the lottery was just the beginning of my story. The real challenge would be learning how to live with this kind of money without letting it destroy everything good in my life. Jake's final words kept echoing in my head. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe having financial security would open doors and create opportunities I'd never imagined. But sitting alone in that hotel room, surrounded by wealth I'd never asked for, I couldn't shake the feeling that some of my problems were just beginning. The lottery ticket that started as Frank's mistake had given me more money than I'd ever dreamed of. Whether it would give me the life I actually wanted remained be seen. Thanks for sticking with this crazy story about how a simple cashier mistake changed everything. I'm curious. What do you think about Jake's actions? Was he just desperate? Or did the money reveal who he really was all along? And do you believe that lottery winners end up isolated and unhappy? Or is that just what people tell themselves? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales. Your support means everything to me, and I love reading your perspectives on these situations. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.